Count me out, keep it simple. I swim it, I love it again. I spin it, the more I can feel it. Beside you.
The dimly lit room in the heart of Busan City's underworld was thick with smoke and tension. The air was filled with the scent of expensive leather and the unmistakable aura of power. At the center of it all sat Park Jimin, the feared mafia king, a man whose name sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to speak it. His dark eyes were fixed on the woman standing across the room, her soft laughter like a melody that haunted him day and night. Min Hwan, the girlfriend of Jimin's younger brother, Jacob, was everything he shouldn't want but couldn't resist. She was beautiful, with long, wavy hair that framed her delicate face, and eyes that sparkled with mischief and innocence. She was untouchable, yet every time Jimin saw her, his obsession grew stronger, consuming him like a raging fire. Tonight, she was wearing a deep red dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her presence commanding attention in the crowded room. Jimin's jaw tightened as he watched Jacob drape an arm around her waist, pulling her close. His brother was oblivious to the way Jimin's gaze lingered on her, how his thoughts were consumed by her every move. Jimin took a slow sip of his eyes never leaving Hwan. The voices around him faded into the background, and all he could hear was her laughter, all he could see was the way her lips curved into a smile.
Jimin,
Jacob called out, breaking through his trance.
come meet Hwan.
Jimin's heart pounded in his chest as he approached them, his usual confident stride feeling heavier than ever. Hwan looked up at him, her smile polite but curious.
Jimin,
Jacob continued.
this is Hwan, the love of my life.
Hwan extended her hand, her touch sending an electric shock through Jimin's body.
It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Jimin. Jacob's told me so much about you.
The pleasure is mine.
Jimin replied, his voice low and controlled. But inside, he was anything but in control.
Jacob's a lucky man.
Hwan blushed, her gaze briefly meeting Jimin's before she looked away. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of something that Jimin couldn't quite place, but it made his heart race. Jacob chuckled, oblivious to the tension.
I'm the lucky one. Hwan's the best thing that ever happened to me.
Jimin forced a smile, his mind already spinning with thoughts he knew he shouldn't be having.
She's special.
He murmured, his eyes locking with Hwan's once more. As the night went on, Jimin found himself watching Hwan more closely, noticing the way she interacted with others, the way she laughed, the way she seemed to light up the room. He hated how much he wanted her, how much he desired something that belonged to his brother. It was wrong, and yet he couldn't stop himself.
Days turned into weeks, and Jimin's obsession only deepened. He found himself thinking about Hwan constantly, his thoughts consumed by her smile, her voice, her scent. He began finding excuses to be near her, to see her, to talk to her. It was. And he knew it, but he couldn't stop himself. One evening, after a family dinner, Jimin found himself alone with Hwan in the garden of the park estate. The moonlight cast a soft glow over her features, making her look even more beautiful. She was leaning against a marble fountain, the sound of trickling water filling the silence between them.
Hwan,
Jimin began, his voice low and...
do you ever think about what could have been?
She looked at him, her expression confused.
What do you mean?
If things were different?
Jimin continued, stepping closer to her.
If Jacob wasn't in the picture, would you have considered being with someone like me?
Hwan's eyes widened in shock, and she took a step back.
Jimin, what are you saying?
I'm saying I can't stop thinking about you.
Jimin confessed, his voice raw with emotion.
Every time I see you with Jacob, hit me inside. I want you, Hwan. I've wanted you from the moment I saw you.
Hwan shook her head, her voice trembling.
Jimin, this is wrong. I love Jacob. He's your brother.
I know it's wrong,
Jimin replied, his voice desperate.
but I can't help how I feel. I need you, Hwan. I can give you everything you've ever wanted.
Hwan's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away.
You don't understand. I love Jacob. I can't betray him like this.
Jimin reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands.
But what if you could? What if you could be with me without hurting him?
Hwayeon's breath hitched, and for a moment, Jimin thought she might. Him. But then she pulled away, shaking her head.
No, Jimin. I can't do this. I won't do this. Please, don't make me choose.
Jimin's heart shattered as he watched her walk away, her rejection cutting deeper than any wound he'd ever received. But even as she disappeared into the night, he knew he couldn't give up. His obsession was too strong, too powerful. He would find a way to make her his, no matter the cost. Jimin's obsession with Hwayeon began to consume every aspect of his life. He became more reckless, more willing to take risks to be near her. He started manipulating situations, creating opportunities to see her alone, to talk to her, to make her see that he was the one she truly belonged with. One night, Jimin orchestrated a situation where Jacob would be called away on urgent business, leaving Hwayeon alone at the Park estate. Jimin knew it was dangerous, that he was playing with fire, but he didn't care. He needed to see her, to be near her. He found her in the library, curled up on a plush chair with a book in her hands. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary.
Jimin,
She said softly.
what are you doing here?
I needed to see you.
Jimin replied, his voice intense.
I can't stop thinking about you, Hwayeon. It's driving me insane.
Hwayeon closed her book, her eyes filled with sadness.
Jimin, we've talked about this. You know how I feel.
I know,
Jimin said, stepping closer to her.
but I can't stop. I need you, Hwayeon. I need you more than I've ever needed anything in my life.
Hwayeon stood up, her hands trembling.
Jimin, please. Don't do this. You're Jacob's brother. This isn't right.
Jimin reached out, gently taking her hands in his.
But what if it is? What if we're meant to be together?
Hwayeon's breath hitched, and for a moment, Jimin thought she might finally give in to the passion that had been simmering between them for so long. But then she pulled away, shaking her head.
No, Jimin.
She whispered, her voice filled with pain.
I love Jacob. I can't do this to him. I won't.
Jimin's heart ached as he watched her walk away, but he wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't give up. He was too far gone, too consumed by his obsession. He would find a way to make her see that they were meant to be together. Jimin's obsession began to take a darker turn. He became more possessive, more controlling. He started to isolate Hwayeon, to create rifts between her and Jacob. He manipulated situations, planting seeds of doubt in her mind, making her question her relationship with Jacob. One evening, after a heated argument with Jacob, Hwayeon found herself seeking solace in Jimin's arms. He held her close, his heart pounding with triumph as she cried against his chest.
Shh.
Jimin whispered, stroking her hair.
It's okay, Hwayeon. I'm here. I'll always be here for you.
Hwayeon looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and pain.
I don't know what to do, Jimin. Everything's falling apart.
Jimin cupped her face in his hands, his voice gentle but insistent.
You don't need to worry, darling. Just stay by my side and trust me. I'll handle everything for us. You don't need to worry, darling. Just stay by my side and trust me. I'll handle everything for us.
Hwayeon hesitated, her heart torn between the love she had for Jacob and the undeniable attraction she felt for Jimin. She knew it was wrong, that she shouldn't be here, but in this moment, Jimin was the only one who made her feel safe.
Jimin,
She whispered, her voice trembling.
I can't.
Yes, you can.
Jimin replied, his voice filled with conviction.
You belong with me, Hwayeon. You know it. I know it. Don't fight it anymore.
Hwayeon closed her eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she was standing on the edge of a precipice, that one wrong move could destroy everything. But in this moment, all she wanted was to feel Jimin's arms around her, to forget about everything else. She leaned in her, brushing against his. Jimin's breath hitched, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. But then Wyan pulled away, her eyes filled with regret.
I can't do this.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I'm sorry, Jimin. I can't.
Jimin's heart shattered as he watched her walk away, his obsession turning into something darker, something more. He knew he was losing control, that his obsession was consuming him. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He would make Wyan his, no matter what it took. Jimin's obsession had reached its peak, and instead of being consumed by darkness, he found himself at a crossroads. The pull of his desire for Wyan was undeniable, but so was the realization that he couldn't force her to be with him. He had to make her see that what they could have together was real, something worth fighting for. That night, after Jacob had been sent away on a mission, an opportunity Jimin hadn't orchestrated, but one he seized nonetheless, Jimin sought out Wyan. He found her in the garden, the same place where they had first spoken of forbidden feelings. The moonlight bathed her in a soft glow, making her look like an angel descended from the heavens.
Wyan.
Jimin called out softly, his voice no longer filled with desperation but with a determination that burned within him. Wyan turned to him, her heart racing. There was something different about Jimin tonight. His eyes, once dark with obsession, now held a mixture of tenderness and something more dangerous, an intensity that made her pulse quicken with a mix of fear and anticipation.
What are you doing here?
She asked, her voice trembling slightly.
I needed to see you.
Jimin replied, stepping closer.
I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is something I can control. I have tried, Wyan. I have tried to let you go, but I can't.
Wyan's heart ached as she looked at him. She had been torn between her love for Jacob and the undeniable connection she felt with Jimin. But as she stood there, looking into Jimin's eyes, she realized that what she felt for him was deeper, more intense, and frighteningly irresistible.
Jimin, we can't do this. I'm with Jacob.
She began, her voice wavering as she tried to reason with him. But Jimin wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on her, his need for her overwhelming his better judgment. In that moment, something inside him snapped. Without another word, he closed the distance between them and captured her. In a forceful, his hands gripping her arms to keep her from pulling away. The was rough, demanding, filled with all the pent-up emotions he had kept locked away for so long. Wyan's initial instinct was to resist, to push him away, but the intensity of Jimin's need for her stirred something deep inside her. She couldn't deny the fire it ignited within her, the way her responded to his. Even as her mind screamed that it was wrong. She struggled against him, her hands pushing against his chest, but Jimin only held her tighter, his moving against hers with a desperation that bordered on madness. It was that spoke of possession, of a need that couldn't be tamed, and despite herself, Wyan found her resistance wavering. When Jimin finally pulled back, both of them were breathing heavily, their hearts pounding in the silence of the garden. His hands still gripped her arms, his eyes dark with desire as he looked down at her.
Do you see now?
Jimin whispered, his voice with emotion.
You feel it too, Wyan. This thing between us, it's real. It's stronger than anything else.
Wyan's mind was spinning her, still tingling from the force of She wanted to deny it, to tell him that he was wrong, but the truth was, she couldn't. Had awakened something in her that she couldn't ignore, something that scared her as much as it thrilled her. Slowly, she looked up at Jimin, her eyes filled with tears.
Jimin, I can't deny what I feel for you. It's strong, it's real. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what this means, of what will happen if I choose you.
Jimin's heart raced as he heard her words. He could see the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else. Hope, desire, love.
I'll protect you.
Jimin promised, his voice firm.
I'll protect us. I won't let anything happen to you, Wyan. We'll face whatever comes our way together.
Wyan took a deep breath, her heart torn but slowly beginning to mend. She knew that what she had with Jacob was special, but she also knew that her connection with Jimin was something she couldn't walk away from. It was a risk, but it was one she was willing to take.
I want to be with you, Jimin.
Wyan finally said, her voice trembling with emotion.
But we have to do this the right way. We can't hurt Jacob. He deserves better than that.
Jimin nodded, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and happiness.
We'll find a way.
He promised, pulling her into his arms.
We'll make this work, Wyan. I love you.
I love you too, Jimin.
Wyan whispered, her voice filled with certainty.
I've loved you for a long time, even when I didn't want to admit it.
They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of their decision hanging in the air. It wouldn't be easy, but they knew that together, they could face anything.